Okay, so I'm making this video and I'm very well aware that it's going to be a kind of a patchwork of different topics that may have some relational value. I can't promise anything though, and if you've watched some of my previous videos, you would know exactly what I was talking about. Then again, every time you watch a video, it looks different every time, or you're always saying something slightly different every time you watch a video you've pre-recorded and played back 1,000 times. You always tend to look for the connection points that bring some sort of narrative structure to everything, and I'm sure it works that way for me as much as it works that way for everybody else. So it's not anything special today, but and the other kind of point I want to make before I go further on this is there's always these ways of dealing with certain events that occur around the world. Obviously, events that are closer to home make more sense than, say, an event that. And when I say make more sense, I mean for some reason you're much more attuned with it or much more into it in whatever aspect or in whatever capacity than, say, something that happens halfway across the world, etc. The point being is your response is always kind of maybe removed out of just pure geopolitical factors. I mean, but the world is getting to be a smaller place, so there are sensitivities that you do have to have, because you can't necessarily poke fun or be especially vitriolic about something that happens half a world away, and then expect that to be some sort of exceptional case in your country or in your locale, because I think at some level the same things are happening all over the world, out of just pure things like migration and things like instability in economic markets, interoperability of different systems like trade, innovation, all these different factors I could list that kind of create this homogenous world ether or I forget the word, but like this homogenous world zeitgeist that just rings true pretty much anywhere you are. Now, that's not to say that that's completely true. I mean, there are still large inequalities, whether they be societal or human rights or other factors, cultural inequalities, racial inequalities, gender inequalities that are different in different countries. As we all know, I'm just repeating old news here. I'm just saying the same things over and over again. But I'm saying in terms of a worldview, because of the internet, especially because of the internet. I am an atheist, so the internet's like woot woot for me. And it's also interesting. The internet's also interesting in terms of the atheist thing, but also interesting in terms of the spread of religious doctrine and things like that too. I think you can't have one without the other. The spread of information is the spread of information, and going back to the original point, I think that just it definitely means that things are viewed very similarly around the world. I think there might be some sort of punishment or legislative matters that vary. Blah blah blah. I'm saying the same things over and over again, but what I really wanted to get down to before I started going on about other stuff is the terrorist attack in London. So I kind of read a few articles about it, maybe five, six articles, mostly coming from a Canadian perspective. The rest were CNN, and you never really want to pinpoint where you are on these things right off the top, because even the media, and I'm not a huge media corporation, so I don't have all the insights that they would have, but I've noticed that there's this real reticence or real fine line that they play when they start making accusations about where these attacks come from, how they happened, who influenced them, were there any links between certain factors and other factors, blah blah blah. So they're very cautioned and very on the fence early in these reports. Although you could pretty much piece it together by the time you start reading 5-6 articles over a couple days, you start seeing what the story is that emerges, and maybe that's wrong. I mean, there is but I wouldn't say that stories emerge out of nowhere. It's one of those things, right? 50-50, or although maybe this one might be 80-20 kind of thing, but you could, by the time you're second day in, based on the information that's released by the cops or by government officials or anybody investigating, you start seeing, yeah, that's believable, that's plausible, and I mean, given the hard evidence, you could kind of say, well, it's copycat, or it looks like it was inspired at least by something else, and then you have terrorist organizations like ISIS basically right out claiming that yes, that was a soldier of ours, and they identify the person and they have this history, etc., etc. So all these factors come into play, and you end up with this story that looks pretty familiar. And I think there are some people that have made this narrative even as sort of a template or an archetype, very valid in terms of its applicability to attacks that do happen, have happened, and will happen. I think the story behind them becomes kind of obvious and kind of evidentiary after a while. The thing though is, and moving on, I think there's a slew of rote responses you get from either side, especially in the free world, in democratic states, where they talk about the idea of thoughts and prayers being with people, etc., which not to be too funny about it, but I mean it's kind of like, well, didn't thoughts and prayers get us into that mess to begin with terrorist attacks to begin with, or to be specific. The other part of it is just basically, we will not be frightened or deterred, which is acceptable. I mean, there's, and I'm not trying to be some judge here. I'm just saying that is expected, and that's what should happen. Terrorism should not be something that halts everything. But I'm wondering, though, sometimes in the translation of that type of rhetoric, or in those types of responses, you wonder if through the translation, there's this kind of ignorance of what's really going on. You have these left responses that are kind of like, well, the real cause of terrorism is, car accidents or car ownership, and, on top of that, you're more likely to be killed by lightning than through a plane crash. So, there you have it. And then you have this right sort of reaction, which is just kind of like everybody should be like, deathly scared, and like, you should be angry and afraid, and there's this Islamist agenda that's somehow built into the genetic code of every Muslim, and it's pervasive, and it's gonna get you. So I mean, you're given these options that always seem kind of extreme. I mean, the leftist response is not so much extreme. I mean, if pressed for answers, they say some things that don't, things come up that are just, it's not religion, obviously. It's never religion, so, blah, blah, blah. They might think differently sometimes if it's, some sort of terrorist attack committed in the name of Christianity, then, sometimes it's more acceptable if Christianity is to blame. Despite who says what and who's very explicit about their motivations, the left has this very never blame religion or Islam type rhetoric, and so you're presented with all these things that you kind of have to choose from. But I think there's clear motivations, and given the fact that some of these attacks might be lone wolf attacks, like you still. For me, I don't discount the importance of the quote unquote inspiration, or the medium of inspiration anyway, which could be new media technologies like CDs or the internet, or TV. But I mean those things are really modes of communication. But I don't discount the effectiveness of them in recruiting people that are all already kind of maybe radicalized, or gives faith or religion this higher up standing than that's what's usually allowed to be criticized, like politics, etc., etc. So I just, and I know there's all this stuff going on with Donald Trump Jr. Basically tweeting this very brute kind of remark. I'm not sure how brute it actually was, but you're just giving these responses. I mean, obviously, when these things happen, they're really horrible, and they're not they're not at all. I mean, for somebody celebrating a birthday or having an anniversary and touring England and just run down by a car or shot or not shot or stabbed or whatever. Like, I mean, these are just everyday people going about their everyday lives, and when stuff like this happens, it's really sad. But like I said, it's the options you're given by different groups that kind of make you wonder a little bit about where the sense is in all of this. Although I think it's pretty clear, and I think some of these responses are just really bending to pressures and allegiances, etc., etc. So there's that, and then I wanted to address a video that was put out by Dave Rubin. I'm sort of subscribed to his channel now, and I mostly watch the live videos, so I need to kind of buck up on that a little bit. But he asked an interesting question in his last video about the role of government and the role of the individual in terms of their own destinies, in terms of their spending power, in terms of law and order and things like that. And obviously, I don't think he's asking for, or he's expecting some sort of definite answer from anybody, or expecting, some yes or no answer in terms of what government does and what it can and can't do, or what it should and shouldn't do. But I think if you would consider that government offers a form of authority and thus effectiveness, even if that is a little bit ephemeral, government offers law through a process that's not so much at the whim of an individual. An individual can make choices about spending, etc., etc., to varying levels. I mean, yeah, of course you want choice when you go shopping. I mean, yeah, definitely, right? But I mean, in terms of things like healthcare and welfare, do we want these things legislated by government? Do we want government involved in those types of things? I would say yes. I think the fact that litigation is a very, maybe I'm using that word wrong, but the fact that the process by which law comes about through Parliament in Canada, anyway, the Senate in the U.S., there's a certain amount of due process that's entrusted, that's trusted to be carried out in terms of forming these laws, and in such, allow for a very evidence-based, or what you would think would be evidence-based. I mean, sometimes that's arguable, but what should be and would only be better through evidenced processes that lead up to legislation. These things would be better off through government. There's a track record there. There's an indexical relationship with the result and the process. Blah blah blah. So, and then there's, like I mentioned, the authority by which these laws are put into effect, and by which give us a framework within which to work. Now, in Canada we have free healthcare, and I've always tried to be very entrepreneurial in whatever sense. I've never really been wildly successful at it, but I have read a couple articles that said, because we have universal healthcare, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's some sort of crazy communist welfare state where capitalism is seen as evil. I mean, if anything, it kind of enhances the ability of a capitalist or an entrepreneur to invest or to start their own business. I mean, because they don't have to worry about the costs of healthcare. They, so in that sense, it's not like it's some sort of capitalist killing socialist state. Like, I mean, capitalism can manifest itself, or there are different permutations of capitalism that we will see coming to light. I mean, you think about things like public-private partnerships. I mean, these things are all capitalist based, but there are different ways of seeing about these things. And when it comes to like some of the more micro understandings of micro situations, like noise after 11 p.m., etc., like Dave Rubin was mentioning. Yeah, laws are very crucial. I think sometimes, I feel sometimes, although I'm not very studied, I think that in politics and law, but I feel sometimes that there's a lot of trust that people feel ought to be given to the individual, when really I think the individual is subject to whims. Emotional whims and personal whims and situational whims, even within their little circles, like their little tiny like familial units, etc., etc. They're subject to whims. They're never that can't be trusted to uphold any agreed upon law or rule, because those agreed upon law or rules would have to be authoritative. They can't just be ephemeral or temporary, based on like just loose associations or anarchy or some sort of libertarian utopia. So I think government is very important in terms of rules, regulation. It's not always, you're not always controlling the individual either. You're controlling things like corporations and other entities. That philanthropists. That require a certain amount of process and authority in terms of effectively or constructively carrying on with their work. So I think yeah, that would be my sort of answer to it. I still think there's gray areas. I mean, there's a lot of individual freedoms, of course, but individual freedoms are for the rich. Who are we kidding, right? So, but yeah, that's my video. Hopefully I didn't come off too jokingly about the terrorist stuff, but I'm saying some of the stuff is silly that you hear, and you do hear it. Maybe I exaggerated a bit. Maybe there was some hyperbolic wit on my part, but I think generally you hear stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, that's about it. Bye.